All right, folks. Rock here on the Hard Education, and we are here today with Harold Walters, who is a serial entrepreneur. Harold, I believe you were just recently featured on a QSR magazine. Correct me if I'm
Yep,
wrong.
that's correct.
Yeah. All right. If you could just tell us a little bit about yourself and your educational journey, Howard.
Yeah. So basically, um, I'll start from I guess high school. I'm a high school dropout. So since we're talking about education, that's going to be fun. Um, I did like 6 to 8 years going back and forth in community college, thinking that was what I wanted to do with my life, and it wasn't really like what I found myself being passionate about. And then I had my first kid in 2016, and the moment we got pregnant with her, me and my wife, um, I just realized that like, okay, this going to school thing isn't really going to work for me because I need to be able to support my child now, and I didn't want my wife to have to work, so I took the leap into entrepreneurship. And the way I started out was actually um, selling websites and digital marketing services to different local businesses. So doing that, that basically allowed me to um, generate enough income to not only allow my wife to work from home, but also to just allow me to take care of my kid and be with my daughter whenever I wanted to. And it also taught me a lot of things about like selling and put me in a place to where I was able to understand different businesses a lot easier. And so one of those businesses that I created was a e-commerce business. Um, and so that is where I got like my big launch into business. I created a six-figure e-commerce business within about less than I would say 90 days, and that was like the launching pad for me going into um, basically restaurants, consulting for seven-figure, eight-figure, nine-figure retail brands, and consulting. So that's pretty much where I'm at now.
Wow, thank you. On your journey, Harold, I was just curious. You mentioned that you didn't really like high school. It sounded like, and I am a public school teacher, but I'm also a homeschool advocate. What are some things in your experience that you feel like that? Well, let's talk about the pros first. I guess is what's something that you felt like the school system did right by you, and then we can go into like what was about the whole school system that you feel like you didn't really enjoy, that you weren't. It sounded to me like you weren't motivated.
What did I enjoy or what did I not enjoy?
Let's just start with what you might have enjoyed, and then maybe
Okay.
hop into things that like cause you to be like, and.
Yeah. And we're talking about public school, right? I just wanted to
Correct, correct, yeah.
cool, cool. So yeah, I actually, as a kid, um, most of my elementary school was in private school. So I went to private school like pretty much all the way up until the fifth grade, and I had like I think I had maybe 1 year where I went to public school in that moment, and um, I don't know exactly what it was for me, but I just know that whenever I was in public school, I typically did not perform as well as when I was in private school. And I think a lot of it for me was probably more of a social issue. Like, I think a lot of like my upbringing with my family and like, you know, having I was raised by my grandmother. I didn't have my parents in the household. Pretty much everyone I lived with in the household, at least like my uncles and my dad, were all like they either just graduated high school or they didn't graduate high school at all. And but all of my grandmother and everyone and who raised me and her brothers, all her siblings and all that, they were all educated. And so I had a very mixed like, on one side I see family that's able to make money and do things much at a high level without an education, and then I have another side of my family who does have an education and you know has the same outcome essentially, if not worse. And so I guess I would say I wouldn't really say I took anything from school other than what not to do so much. Um, like I remember literally having classes in the sixth grade where we would like our work was to literally just copy pages in a history book or copy pages in an English book, and it was just busy work. I didn't really learn anything from it. Um, but what I would say as far as the positives is being inside of an environment where it kind of mirrors life in a sense, in the real world, as far as like the social goes. There's all different types of people that you go to school with. There's a popular crowd, there's an unpopular crowd, there's people that are high performers, there's people that aren't. And so I would say like going through that allowed me to become really diverse, but also allowed me to understand like how to survive out in the real world outside of school. But as far as educating myself, I can't say much outside of maybe a couple like solid teachers in classes that I really liked, like programming, for instance.
Right. So you mentioned programming, and so Mike, I'm curious. So, do you feel like when you were in that in the education system, you was it the programming? Was it like just because it was a different thing from everyone else you've learned, or is it because truly you feel like this is something that maybe you can use in your later in your life? Like you see like something practical relevance of it.
Yeah. So before I was even took a programming class in high school, I had already started like doing programming on my own. So I had already started learning different programming languages, Visual Basic, C++, C Sharp, things like that, prior to me even like taking a programming class. And so when I was in high school, my first class I ever got like just placed into was like auto tech, and then they did the little like, every like year you do like a survey or whatever, you answer questions and whatnot, and then they kind of decide, what elective you should maybe go into. And so I ended up taking web design my second semester of my freshman year, and it was cool and it was awesome to be in those classes because like I was already doing it on the outside and I wanted to learn more. But what I found when I was in those classes, I wasn't really learning more, and not necessarily I wasn't learning more. I wasn't learning more into a place where I could apply it to what I wanted to apply it to. And so I always wanted to skip the line. I would say that's probably my issue with school is that I always wanted to skip the line. Like I always felt like there was a way to do something um, without necessarily having to learn these other little pieces, which may be called foundational. Um, so yeah, but essentially, yes, the offering of those classes definitely, um, gave me something to look forward to.
Okay. Um, So looking back at your journey through education, or like, through the school system, and now that you are an entrepreneur, and I believe you created courses, right,
Hmm.
to educate people. What do you feel like is like the gap between like like what you learned in school in your experience, right, and now what you've created, right, and you're helping people, I believe, with this ecom business, correct? Like helping people to launch their own. Why do you? What is the gap that you see between these two things? Like,
I think there's a huge lack of mindset teaching in the school system. Mindset, money. Um, I mean, yeah, we teach economics, but we don't really teach it in the sense of where it's really valuable to that person, or at least in business. So I would say like a huge emphasis on mindset like changes everything. And then also, um, I think a big gap is getting directly to the thing that has the most impact. So like I think what happens is I see a lot of people like want to start businesses, and a lot of them that want to start came from like heavy, education, school system, very important, college, which I'm not knocking any of that. Um, but what I've noticed is that when a lot of them get into business, like they have all of these different like blockers and like barriers in their head that have to do with like little things that aren't very important, um, that we create to think like, I have to file this paperwork, I have to have this license, I have to have this, that, and that. Um, and I feel like that gap can be filled by like, hey, here's the things that you can do to start generating income. Because once you start generating income, then you can actually start, um, building the other foundational pieces into it. If that makes sense.
Yeah, could you care to elaborate on that last part? It was very interesting to me. So, what I heard you say was that a lot of people who, let's say, are business majors, right? They want to start a business, but they feel like they have to go in a certain order of things, right? Like get your LLC formed, get this license if you're a restaurant or whatever it is, in whatever state
Yeah.
you're in, and then you can start, generating income, whatnot. So,
Right.
what was your? And I believe you've opened a restaurant. So, could you kind of tell us, what was sort of like that journey? You know what I mean? Like, what do you mean? And maybe we'll see what you mean by like let's just hit the ground running, but what does that
Yeah.
look like exactly? Could you elaborate
Yeah,
that,
for
please?
sure. So, like for instance, when we started our first restaurant, it was me and three of my partners. And when we came up with our concept for the restaurant, it was we just met in a bar and we talked about, hey, what do we want to start? All right, let's we came up with an Hawaiian concept. We came up with a name right there while we were there. We weren't thinking at all about all the different steps that were gonna be barriers for us to making this happen. And so we started like creating the menu. We started putting out, we put out literally that night, like we created an event. We were like, hey, we're going to do a launch party for this thing. So we created a design for the invite and we sent it out. And then we even got to a place where we were meeting with our broker and we were signing the lease for the place that was going to be built like a year and a half from that date. And at that time, we were signing the lease, and then they were like, okay, well, we should file an LLC first. So it was like, okay, cool. So we'll file an LLC. And that was not even something we had to do. The broker actually did it for us. Um, and then we had to pay a deposit, which was like $24,000 to open up the shop. And we, at no point did we even think about any of these things moving into it. So basically, what I'm getting at is like we took all the steps without thinking about all the other things that needed to get done. We just thought about the core thing, which is we want to create a restaurant, so we need a menu, we need a logo, we need this, but we weren't thinking about, well, are we going to have the money? Are we going to have that? Are we going to have this? We just moved, you know. And I think a lot of times we don't teach just like, or I don't see a lot of teaching on just get to action and just keep moving on what you want to do.
Right. It sounds like we're there's this gap between, like, the theoretical, right, and then the practical side of business, of, let's say business, where,
Right,
I think business school teaches a lot of theory, a lot of, like, how to manage a business, right? Like,
right.
accounting, this and that, and all the different departments and structure. But then not necessarily the execution part, perhaps, is what is being taught. Is that what I'm hearing?
Exactly. It's like for instance, like you don't learn anything about negotiating. Like you might learn like some little basic theories about negotiating, but it's like there's a thousand different ways to make a deal happen. But instead, like we have it in our mind that like things have to be there has to be a certain sheet of paper, it has to be signed a certain way, it has to be written a certain way, and if you don't do it right, you're gonna get in trouble. And it's like even if that's true, it's like there's so many businesses are started every day. Like someone has to like keep track of this stuff. At the end of the day, like, you know, the chances of anything being coming down on you really, really hard for missing one form that you didn't know about or something like that probably won't even matter until you're actually making money, like a lot of money, you know? So it's like at that point you can take care of it. So I think, yeah, that you hit the nail on the head. Like it's it's there's just a lack of here's the steps that you need to take to make this thing happen. Like if I was to go to like a business class, I took a business class in college, and I remember like one, the professor didn't have any experience in business, so everything they were teaching was just from the textbook that they read, and it was no like there was no practical information. And then so you get in a place where now you have to sign a deal or something like that. You don't even know how to like communicate, or you don't even know how to have just a regular conversation about it. I've been in rooms with people that like are, 7, 8, 9 figure earners and they dress like me or they dress like they don't care about, anything. And but we have it in our head that like, no, you have to have a suit and tie on and like, you know, but yeah, basically what you just said, action over theory.
Why do you feel like that is the case? Especially when you pointed out, like, your professor, right? It sounded like he was just reading off the textbook and just kind of almost like regurgitating information in front of you in a lecture hall. And I'm sure, if I heard that, as a from a college student, I could say, yeah, I would probably skip that lecture because it's in the textbook. Why bother going, wasting my time,
Right.
basically. or just wait for the
Yeah.
video recording to come out these days.
Yeah.
Yeah. But where do you feel like that gap is? Is like, why is there such a huge gap between like what we're teaching um, in these sort of like institutions, right? Because it sounds like what you're saying is like, yeah, it's like there's a gap between what we're teaching in institutions of things that are supposed to be practical relevant. Like you're a business major, you should know how to file an LLC and do all these basic things. But it sounds like it didn't quite transit. So where do you feel like who dropped the ball basically in this case, or what dropped the ball?
Yeah. Um, I think there's two sides to the coin. So one, I mean, government moves slow pretty much in everything. It's always behind. There's a lot of politics. There's a lot of like, if I came up with this idea and brought it to the school board, it's not going to be something that, you know, is that transcends throughout this public school system immediately. It's going to take years. Um, I think the other side of it though is that it's true. Like there's a lot of different ways to do things. So it's like, for instance, if like filing an LLC, and this is the type of stuff that you end up hearing that like makes everyone like, oh, I don't know what to do. But it's like with filing an LLC, it's like it's going to be different depending on what state you live in. Should you even file one depending on what business that you're going to start, things like that. So there's certain questions that necessarily can't be answered in that setting. So I understand why some certain things aren't taught, because at the end of the day, who's going to take responsibility for it? The school system is, if you're teaching people how to do certain things like that and they're doing them wrong. So, I mean, the only thing I could really say is like, I just think that government moves slow, and it also gets set in its ways of like, this is how we've done things for so long. Um, I don't know. Like if I'm giving my honest theory out, like I have like my honest opinion is that like if you look back in history, it's like pretty much everyone was private school or homeschooled, before the public school system, came. And what I'm getting at with that is that um, I feel like the public school system is like just let's get people in and get them out, get them in, get them out, make sure they come to school, get them out. It's not necessarily about making them the best person possible. It's more about making them fit within the criteria that they would like to see Americans live in. If that makes sense.
Right, be like a law-abiding citizen, which is fine.
Right.
Um, but it also feels like there's this gap of like, okay, I have a high school diploma. What does that mean?
Right.
Like, does that like I don't even know how to file my taxes most of the time.
Right.
I may have taken a class called economics to let's say get my high school degree, which I remember I had. I think you probably had it too, also probably
Yeah.
some kind of requirement. But then okay, great. I have took a class in economics for a semester. Does that mean I know how to file my taxes? Nope, not a
Right.
clue. Right. And how do I go get a job? What does a resume look like?
Right.
I tell you, like, honestly, in all my education, I'm like, I never had someone teach me how to do a resume. I actually had to like, Google it and sort of like even figure something as basic as that out myself,
Yeah.
or just consult, people who've been working longer, basically.
No, absolutely. Same here. Like I mean, like I said, I dropped out, so like I didn't even take economics. I didn't take government. Um, but I can tell you right now, I could probably tell you more, or tell like the average high school graduate, or probably even someone that studied economics, more about economics or government than they would be able to. Um, and that's also like it's more holistic too, because it's like I'm learning from different people, like different writers in economics on different sides, and they're giving their types of their theories and their ideas. So now I can actually have a more holistic view, and I can actually you know compare and contrast, as opposed to just, hey, this is what I learned, this is truth to me, and spitting it out there.
No, absolutely, because it's from your experience. You've actually lived through these things.
Right.
Do you feel like your so we're just transitioning a little bit. Do you feel like your experience with the public school education system kind of influenced you and your wife to kind of homeschool your kids? Could you just talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. Like I said, like yeah, I grew up in private school, so I knew what it was. I knew the difference, and also, yeah, I'm homeschooling my daughter right now, and I probably will up to kindergarten for all of my kids. But after that, I'm actually going to be putting Naomi in private school, and then maybe later on, I'll probably homeschool her again with like a private tutor or something. Like that's what I'm thinking. Um, but I do believe that like when they get to say their freshman year, and if they want to go to public school, I'd be open to it. Um, it. At the end of the day, I'm really just trying to create a foundation for them first and help them understand that like education is more than what they're going to get in school. Like I feel like school is more. I'm just like I said, you're going through this because it's necessary. It's a requirement for you to be, you know, a normal citizen essentially. If you don't, you're going to be looked at a certain way. And yeah, it also does affect certain opportunities, like to some extent. But yeah, so I would say that if, as far as how it influenced me, um, I just essentially want to have a lot of control of what they're learning right now in these early years, where everything that they're learning is being just completely absorbed into them. I need to be able to give them. We need to be able to control the narrative in this time frame right now where it's so sensitive.
Okay, I hear you. So you're just saying that, especially right now, when since they're so young, you want to make sure that whatever is they absorb and or inputted them is things you want them to kind of carry on in their life. So could you give us some examples of like some values perhaps that you're stealing in them, or just some philosophies or mindsets? Because you kept talking about like mindset, right? Like a lot of business people don't have these mindsets that actually help them get to generating revenue and whatnot. So if you can just share a bit about that.
Yeah, yeah. I like to like one like confidence. Um, just building that up now so that it's not like, hey, I'm walking into this thing not knowing that who I am. Not saying that I'm going to be able to tell them who they are right now or get them to know that, but just understanding that like, hey, you're able to be whoever you want to be, and not get them already plugged into this huge amount of peer pressure in a sense. Um, the other thing too is like just how I teach them about money, like how we talk about like money's not something that's like a stigma to us, like or not a stigma, like it's not taboo. Like I know some houses where like you just talk about money and it's like you know you don't ask people how much money they have. You don't talk about how much money you have. You know you're mindful of how you spend and how you budget. And I like to teach my kids that like no, like there's an abundance of this. Like this is not something that we need to struggle over. And even if we are struggling, I'm teaching them that like no, like it's gonna come, you know. And so I want to make sure they have these understanding before they get exposed to where they're around a bunch of other people that have been taught a certain way from their family, and then they start sharing it with them, and now they start thinking it's truth because for whatever reason. I think there's a lot of other things that go into it too, like even the ages we put them in school. Like, are they the oldest kid in the class or are they the youngest kid in the class? Because if they're the youngest kid in the class, then they're going to take, you know, they might look at the older person and just take whatever they say and say that word is bond. So, yeah, I would say confidence, money, spirituality, um, and then just like priorities, like understanding like what's important for them.
Okay, yeah, that sounds really good. I love that you're teaching your kids about like money because you're right. Like a lot of people, the most they hear about money is either money doesn't grow on trees when you ask for things, right?
Hmm.
Or like, what do you think? I'm made of money or something. And those sayings have an impact on our children on how they view money. And
Right.
we're not saying money is the most important thing, but it is very helpful for life for
Yeah,
sure.
for sure.
Yeah, no, I'm glad to hear that. So as you know, so a lot of my audiences, like they're homeschooling or they're thinking about it, but maybe their biggest hurdle perhaps is, hey, you gotta have one person at home, whether it's mom, dad, or whoever's. So that could mean a loss of an income. So you had mentioned that you made the jump to entrepreneurship, and that really helped you free up your time. What are some practical things that you would tell any homeschool mom or parent out there that like, hey, if you were to start something today, here's what I would do.
Yeah. Um, I mean, there's a few different things, but primarily like e-commerce is one that was huge for me. I think one thing that I would say is the biggest to learn though, and I'll say this because this is what, like I said, um, was my launching pad, and that was like web design. And so I knew how to do web design. And I'm saying web design because I want everyone to understand that if they have a service or they're an expert at something, or when I say expert, I mean that you can teach somebody how to do something um, that right there is like one of the most important qualities you can have. But the important quality that you need to have before that, or along with it, is the ability to sell. And so when I did web design, like I had a really hard time finding clients. Even the clients I did find, I would maybe sell them a $300 package or something like that. And most times people wouldn't even agree to pay me for it. And so what ended up happening was I invested into a course, and that course, I thought it was going to teach me how to be a better web designer. I thought it was going to teach me how to stand out as a web designer. I thought it was going to show me how to build this amazing portfolio and all this other stuff, and teach me just how to be better. And when I got in the course, it didn't teach me any of that. It actually taught me how to position myself, how to sell, how to find the right clients to work with, and all of those things. And literally, without changing anything about my skill set, I was able to start charging 5x the price, and people would pay for it, and they would still be happy. So, I would say my number one thing would be to first take inventory of what you have. So you're going to sell. I would say sell something online. That would be my first thing. Um, but what I would say is take inventory of what you already have, what you possess. Is it education? If you're a homeschooling parent and you're really good at it, maybe you should do education on how people could homeschool. Like I'll be honest, we're not the best homeschoolers right now. Like I know that, and that's actually one of the reasons why I want to put my kids in private school too, because we're like I'm a good teacher, but if you're giving me a curriculum to teach, that's like not really like the best for me, you know? So, but I know there's a large audience of people that want to homeschool their kids, especially right now, that, especially, you know, with everything going on with COVID, with a lot of the political stuff happening right now, there's a huge influx of people that want to homeschool their kids, but they probably don't even know how. And so take inventory. What can you sell, like as far as a service or education and whatnot, and learn how to sell essentially. Um, but other thing would be, like I said, e-commerce. And so taking that information and then being able to know that you have something that you can sell and formulating it into a course or a membership or even a product and learning how to run advertisement, social media, and things like that to be able to sell it because it's a huge growing niche right now, and there's a ton of people that are flocking online looking for information on how can they build a business or how can they, you know, whatever it is. Like, and that's one thing I actually wanted to mention when you were talking earlier about like how the school system can improve. And I think something to consider is like when we were in school, there wasn't really a lot of like um, online information that you can access. Like that's why we had to use it. Even when we would do like essays and stuff, our references had to come out of an encyclopedia or like an improved source. There was never using Wikipedia, and even then, Wikipedia didn't even have that much information, or there was no YouTube. So nowadays, it's like all of that information is available now, and that's where people are heading to get educated on things. And so, yeah, I would say e-commerce would be my number one focus.
Okay, so I heard you saying that you got to think about like what skill you have and then how to package it, right? How to sell it. And so could you just tell us our audience about like what exactly is e-commerce and do I need a passion or have like knowledge of something in order to do this? Like what is it? What are the practical steps to get into e-commerce?
Yeah, so Um, you know, it used to be really hard. Like I had built my first e-commerce store when I was 15, and it used to be really, really hard. It was very expensive. But now anyone can essentially start an e-commerce store. And to answer your question about what e-commerce is literally just online selling. You're selling products online. It's the merchant transactions on the internet, and that could be anything. It could be selling a product on a Shopify store. It can be using YouTube and just posting a lot of videos and you generate money from that. That's all a form of e-commerce. Anytime you make money on the internet, it's e-commerce. And but what my suggestion is to start either an online store or start an education platform. I mean, it's basically like what you're kind of doing right now as well. But I can tell you from the people I've coached, I've had students that literally had no experience whatsoever, never even touched a computer, that have had success, that have made over 20, 30 grand a month in monthly recurring revenue. And they didn't have a skill set. Well, they had a skill set, but they didn't have knowledge of e-commerce. They didn't have a specific niche that they wanted to go into that they were passionate about. All of these different things are things that you can do without necessarily having to be passionate or understand it. You can learn the market, you learn what the people want, and then you find the product that you can sell them. And yeah, so many different ways to do it. Like I said, there's 1,000 different ways to skin a cat, essentially. Um, but yeah, it's mainly um, finding the right market, finding the right product for that market, and advertising.
Okay. Um, let's see here. So what? So if our audience would like to find out more, where would they go to? Like, let's say, talk to you or reach out to you, or do you have like something set up already?
Yeah, so I was actually originally going to send you a link for the workshop that we were doing. It was supposed to be on the 28th, but we're actually moving the date. So I won't send that link, but what I would say is just have anyone follow me on my Instagram, which is Harold I. Walters. So I actually just send it to you right now in the chat. Um, and I think you should be able to actually post this on StreamYard, right? Like so people can see it. Um, but yeah, I just put it inside of the chat as well. So, but it's Instagram.com/Harold I. Walters. There it is. Yep.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
I'm learning this as well as we go along.
No, you're fine. So yeah,
Yeah.
you can follow me on Instagram. I'm always posting content, not as much as I used to, but I'm always posting content on e-commerce. And if I'm doing like a workshop or something, that's where it's going to be posted. And you can also find me on Facebook as well, Harold I. Walters, or you can find my personal profile at Harold Walters.
All right. One last question here before we get off from this interview. As you know, the title of this podcast is Hard Education. And I actually looked up the root word of education, educo. So education literally means to draw from within yourself, is
Yeah.
the rough translation from Latin. When you hear, the hard education, what sort of image comes up to you?
I would say mastery. I think like it's a desire to like master, which is where I think the school system fails is that we don't teach mastery. And so it's like a discipline thing of like, whatever I learn, I'm going to put um, effort into making this thing something that is um, effortless. And I think a lot of times right now is we learn a lot of different things in school, but we don't learn them to where I can effortlessly communicate it. I can effortlessly do it. I can effortlessly talk about it. And so I think mastery is what pops in my head when you say like, it's drawing from within. Um, yeah,
Okay, great. Thank you, Harold. And for everyone else, if you'd like to reach out to Harold regarding how to start an ecom business and whatnot, you can reach him out at Harold I. Walters on Instagram, also on Facebook, I believe.
yeah.
Yes.
Harold Isaac Walters on Facebook
Yep.
on my
All right.
profile.
Well, thank you very much, Harold, for coming online and just sharing your experience. We appreciate it so much.
No problem, Rock.
All
You
right.
have a good
Thank you,
one.
man.
Thanks,
Mhm.
everybody.
Take care, everyone.